Well, hello and welcome to the next video. So to get started, you need several things. MongoDB, and as you can see, this is their site. Installation should be pretty straightforward, but if you run into any issues, write a comment on this video and I'll try to help. Next, there is this application that is called RoboMongo, and now you don't actually need it, but it's pretty neat. And you can, I'll show you in a bit. This is the application that I'm talking about, and once you connect to your MongoDB, you can actually see all of your databases, you can see all of the collections, and you can pretty easily play and see what's inside, so you don't need to use terminal to do that. So that's an option if you want. Next, once you install MongoDB, you actually need to start it in the background, otherwise you still can't access it. So to do that, if you're on the Windows, you pretty much need to navigate to this directory over here, and then inside here there is a file called MongoD that is executable. You would simply type MongoD, and as you can see, waiting for connections on port and then the port number. So now the MongoDB is running in the background. Okay, so I'll leave it like that. And now I can actually start our server. Okay, and let's continue, shall we? So first of all, we need some sort of an interface to the MongoDB. For that, we're going to use Mongoose dependency. So actually we need to install it. So I need to quit this and go yarn add Mongoose. While that's downloading in the background, we also need to require it inside of this app.js file. So I'll go const mongoose equals require mongoose like this. Okay, and after that we need to actually make a connection. To do that, you would simply use the mongoose that you just declared, and there is a function called connect. This one, as an argument, it requires a URI, which is a string to your database. That string begins with a protocol. Protocol in our case is MongoDB, followed by localhost because we're currently on our dev machine, and then here you would put the name of your database. You don't need to actually create a database before you make a connection. Mongoose will check if the name of your database already exists, and then it won't create it again, but if it doesn't exist, it will actually create it for you. So let's call database API project like this. Okay, so let's now simply check that everything is working as it should. Okay, server is listening. Okay, great. Okay, so now what could we do next? Well, we could definitely get started on the get here. I mean, we already have like a skeleton, but this is definitely not the code that should be in there. So to do that, we actually need to get started with the model first. So let's actually do that, and let's create a new file inside of this directory called user singular. So user is supposed to describe our user's model for us. So we need to use a mongoose to create this model. So I'll go const mongoose equals require mongoose like this, and then we need to get a handle on the schema. Schema is contained inside mongoose.schema, but we can also make it a bit more shorter for us to write by doing this. This is totally optional. And now we actually need to create a user schema. So that user schema will again be a variable. So I'm going to go const user schema equals, I want a new schema that we just declared up above. And then we need to pass in an object here, not an array, but oh yeah, sorry, object. Okay, so inside of this object we want to basically describe the user. So as I said in the introductory video, a user will contain a first name, and first name should be of a type string. That sounds pretty normal. Then user will also have a last name, and it should also be of a type string. Next, user will have an email, again of a type string, and we also discussed that user should have a field called cars, that is actually an array of the cars currently being sold by that particular user. So to describe that in the Mongoose, let's break it like bit by bit. So first of all, it should be an array. So okay, that's done. An array of cars. Car in the end will also be like another model, so that will be like an object. So we need object, and then we need to specify the type. Type is, when we said string, type was like there, but we didn't have to specify it. For example, you could also do it like this. You could also do it like type string, like this. But this is just like the shorthand notation. Okay. So here we need to specify type as a schema that we declared up above. Types. Then we have inside of here we have object ID. And then we need to specify ref as a reference, and we will simply say car. Now I understand that this doesn't make a lot of sense for now, but later on, once we actually create a car model and we actually hook it up and do kind of similar things inside of the car for the owner, purely by repetition you should understand it a bit more and shouldn't be that confusing anymore. So with that out of the way, we want to actually construct the model. The schema is just one part of a model, and we want like the entire user model. So to do that, we need to use the Mongoose, and there is a method called model that defines a model or retrieves it. We want to define it now. So here we want to provide a name for this model, and you should provide it in a singular form, because Mongoose will take the name that you put here and will pluralize it, and then it will save it as a collection inside of your database. So I would type here user, and then we need to provide the schema that we just defined in this variable up above. Okay, and now to make use of this, we actually need to save the return value that this function will give us, and that's the actual model we are after. So I'm going to declare another variable called user with an uppercase, and then I'm going to simply export this object here. Module.export equals user, like this. And now we have access to all of this. Okay. So now that we have access of that, we can actually make use of this model inside of our controller here. So up above, I'll simply get a handle on that. So I need to get a handle on that user model, basically this. To do so, I'll simply say user equals require. Okay, then we need to navigate up above, and there is a models folder, and inside there is a user file, like that. Okay, and now we have access to it. So let's play with it for a bit. So inside of this index function, let's try to fetch all the users there are. Now currently there will be 0 users, but bear with me. And there are pretty much 3 ways to do it. Fundamentally 2, but visually they're more like 3. So I'll make a comment here and write something like, we can interact with Mongoose in 3 different ways. So we can do it via callbacks, we can do it via promises, or we can do it via async await, which are really promises but much nicer to the eye. So we can try all three just to get a feel for it. So for example, first let's do with the callbacks. So how should we fetch all the users? Well, we will start with that user model that we exposed, and there is a method called find. Now that method expects object that describes what needs to be found, but when you don't provide anything and instead you just provide an empty object, it will fetch all the users for you. So now if you want to use a callback approach, we will simply put error comma users, and this over here is our callback function actually. So now once inside, we can actually go and console log found users and simply pass users, and we can also console.error error just in case there are some. Okay, and we should actually we can comment out this for now because we don't really care, like this. Okay, so now inside of our postman, let's try it out. So that should be localhost 3000/users, I believe. And now of course this won't ever finish because we're not responding and we're not like quitting this particular request, but that's not important because we're interested in this one. So as you can see, we don't have any errors. That's the null here, and the found users is an empty array, which is alright because we expected as much. Before we actually create the post, we can't really play with this too much because we will always end up seeing the empty array. So for that reasons, let's do this. Let's actually, instead of using the console.log, let's do it like this. If there is an error, we want to call next with that error. That's our handling case. Otherwise, we want to go res.status of 200.json users, like this. Now we can remove this. Okay, and let's actually get started on writing the next one over here. So let's call it new user. That sounds about right. So I'll go users controller.new user, like this. Then we also need to create that method inside of our controller. And by the way, don't worry about this callback. This is not like what I want to keep on doing. This is just like for demonstrational purposes. We will convert all of these into async await. So now let's create a new user method. Again, we will have request, response, and next. And now what we need to do is we actually want to create a new user. So we expect okay, so that route will look something like this. So we will still have the same route, but we will have the post method, and then for a body we want to pass something as a JSON. So inside of this new user, we expect to get some values passed from the client, and that value is going to be stored in the request object and then the body. For now, let's simply console log that. Let's say request.body contents, and then simply output what it contains. Okay, it should be also auto. Okay, so this is because I was in the middle of doing something and I saved, and then it wasn't in the working state because I didn't finish what I was trying to do. Okay, anyway, now the server is listening, and if I come here and let's say we pass like just a first name, John, for example, okay, and you see request.body contents are undefined. The reason behind such thing is that we need to actually use something called body parser. You see, like Express is really minimalistic and it only wants you to do what you need at any given point, so you need to install quite a bit of things to just get things moving. So let's go to our terminal once again and actually install it. So you would type yarn add or npm install yarn add body dash parser like this. Then inside of your app.js we also need to require it. Const body parser equals require body parser, okay, and then we actually need to make a use of it as a middleware. So we want to use that body parser, and we want to specify to body parser that we are only interested in JSON. So we won't have any like forms that we want to get the values of, but instead whenever someone wants to send some data to our server, it should be done using the JSON and nothing else. So now that we have this addition to our code, let's simply try it again. Okay, so we need to start the yarn start, and now we can actually cancel this and send. And as you can see now, request.body contents are indeed the one that we are looking for. Awesome. So now if we come back to our controller here, we can actually make use of this. So how to make use of it? Well, we first want to create a new user. To do that, we need to pass the data that contains the pretty much the user schema filled out to this object that we just required. So we will simply create a new variable called new user, and then we would say new user, and this is where we should send an object containing all the data that should be put for that particular new user. So for now, let's simply go request.body like this, and then let's simply output what new user actually contains, and let's try it again. So this should also auto restart, yes, and let's see what happens. Okay, and as you can see, the Mongo actually did something because it auto appended this underscore ID, and this is how MongoDB handles the IDs. But we declared quite a few more fields in here, so let's actually provide all of them. So inside of the postman, let's continue writing this. So we'll have last name, Smith, for example, and then email, but you need to put it in the double quotes, email, and john@gmail.com, for example. Okay, so now if I send this and I check this, you see how everything looks as it should here. Okay, awesome. But now if you were to use actually the RoboMongo that I mentioned previously, let's actually go and create a new connection. I'll create here by clicking on this button, and let's name it code worker local. But of course you can name it anything you want and pretty much leave all the settings as they are currently. You can test it, everything seems fine. Okay, and let's now connect to it. Okay, so now as you can see, we are still not seeing this database of ours because like nothing has actually been stored in it. Like this line of code here doesn't actually save that to the database, but instead it just creates a new object that then you could potentially save to a database. So let's actually do just that. we can use this variable here, new user, and then we have this save method. Save method, again, if you want to use callbacks, expect callback, no surprises there, and callback will actually can actually yield back error as a first argument and the user that got saved. Okay, so now if I go here, and we can again do a similar thing we did above. We can check if there are any errors, and we can simply see what's inside of this user variable. Okay, so now let's try this one again. Okay, so what happens here? Let me make it so you can see side by side. Okay, so first error is null, that means there are no errors, that's great. And then you can see the user that got saved is this one actually. And now we can go back to the RoboMongo, and if we refresh this database, you see now we have an API project entry, and if I expand it, you see there is a folder called collections, and inside of there we have a single collection called users. If I double click it, you'll see that we have one document over here, and you can expand it and see basically the things that we saw here. And you can also like display it in a different settings. You can see it as a text, as a table, or as a tree kind of. We are actually saving the new user. It would be pretty good idea to actually respond back so our client doesn't get stuck like it is currently. So we can go res status. Status should be of 201, meaning something got created successfully, and then we can simply pass that user that got saved as a JSON. So now let's clean this up a bit like this, and let's see now if this doesn't keep on hanging like it is currently. So I'll cancel the request, I'll send it, and yes, as you can see, everything worked. Okay, so this is all nice, but we definitely don't want to use callbacks now that we have promises and even async await. So before I end this video, let's at least convert this code to promises, and then in the later ones I'll even convert it back to the async await, so you'll be able to see like all the ways that you can do this. So to convert this code into promises, let me create like a copy of these functions so you can see a side-by-side comparison before I remove them. So we will have an index function. It will again have the same parameters. And now what we need to do? Well, user, again we will use the user, and we will again use the find method. And we will again pass the empty object to the find method, but now this also returns a promise. So instead of chaining on like the callbacks inside, we can then we can actually write this then and chain on that method, and it simply means when this finishes, then execute function inside of here. So inside of here we need to get handle on this returned object called users. So we will have users, we'll do something with users here, but we also need to check for any errors that might happen, and you see how we checked for them before, but now we can actually go here and do catch any error that might have happened, and if there are any errors we can simply go next that error like here, like this. Then inside here we actually can pretty much cut and paste that line like that. And now as you can see, okay, let me return that so you can see a side-by-side comparison. Now for this one it doesn't look much different, but when you have like a lot of functions, like imagine, I don't know, like I'm going to make something up, but imagine you have something here, and then you have something there and there, and this is called like the pyramid of doom because it gets like a lot of nesting, and that's really hard to follow the logic of what's going on. So promises are kind of preferred approach to the callbacks. So for now let's leave it as a promise, but later on I said we will go even with a sync await, which is even nicer in my opinion. So now let's also make this one before we quit this pretty long video. So I'm going to make a new function called new user, request response next. Okay, now this line, as you can see, nothing wrong with that, so that won't be changed at all. But now when we want to actually try and save the new user, we'll go new user.save, and now that will return a promise similarly to what happened above. Then we can also tack on the then method, which accepts a function, and if you remember, we were able to get the saved user, so we can get it here. And now we can actually do something with that user. So what we did here is we responded back to our client with it. Okay, but we also need to check for an error. So I'm going to catch any error here, and if any error happened, I'll simply pass it to the next. Okay, okay, and now actually this looks quite shorter than this one, but if you take a look, we totally forgot to do an error handling here. So in reality it would be something like this. Okay, so let's simply check if we didn't mess something up. So here, okay, everything is good, and if I send the post, it works. Now we can actually test the get, because we have like several users and we get an array of users. Before I leave though, you see this deprecation warning. Mongoose and promise is deprecated, plug in your own promise library instead. Well, let's just quickly fix that because that's annoying. So what's going on is Mongoose actually asks you what promises implementation you want to use, because it doesn't want to make any assumptions on your behalf. So coming here, you need to actually specify which one you want to use. Some of the options are, for example, the native ES6 implementation that's included in JavaScript, or you can even use some of the third-party ones like Bluebird, if you heard of it, and any others that Mongoose supports. So here I'll type mongoose.promise, and then I'm going to say global.promise. Global meaning we want the native ES6 implementation. So this line pretty much says, hey Mongoose, whenever you want to create a promise for like any type of interactions with the database whatsoever, you've seen quite a few of them, then we want you to use this library, global.promise, and that library is a reference to ES6 implementation of promises. So now let's just simply check if that error, not really error, but that deprecation warning goes away. So I'll try to get, you see, no, that we don't see that warning anymore. I can try to post, again, no warning. So with that, I think we can actually stop this video right now. Hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next one.